What news do you watch?
Oh, I mean, no, I don't watch the news then. I watch Twitter and TikTok and whatever they serve me.
Because on my YouTube feed, like I get like the NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll only watch like, they'll break down like it's kind of like a table of contents in the intro. Like, like Donald Trump got arrested. He's got a crazy mugshot. And there's like wildfires in Oklahoma. And this, and like you can kind of just watch the first like minute or 90 seconds and you get all the news that's going to be on the show.
Right.
And if it's like particularly interesting, you can watch the whole 18 to 20 minutes.
I mean, I don't think YouTube even bothers to try to feed me that stuff. I think they just give me like YouTubers talking about shit. Like here's some guy in a basement and he's gonna break down exactly what's going on with COVID. Definitely, we're not gonna show you NBC News telling you this.
Right. I definitely get the NBC News in my feed. I get all the MMA, UFC.
You watch a lot of that stuff?
I love it, dude. I'm addicted to it, man.
Really?
There's all these like MMA channels that just give you like the news in the world of the UFC. And then I have just straight murders. Just like,
yes.
Just murder, like true crime. Like there was a murder and when they've got the suspect in the interrogation room, like I cannot get enough of that.
Yeah. Oh, that stuff. The interrogation room footage, the just overall murder mysteries. And then lately, YouTube has been feeding me a ton of like, this is something that happened with the Hells Angels, or this is the Outlaw Motorcycle Club, like all like any kind of gang. Like it's almost as if they figured out like, okay, he's watched every video about like street gangs. So now we're going to transition him over to the motorcycle gang thing.
Okay. Does a motorcycle gang not count as a street gang?
I mean, to me, the main difference is that they're predominantly white. Because I've just watched like so many videos over the years of like different LA gang stuff or whatever. But lately, I'm actually watching it. And like when they're breaking down, like, oh, okay, this is how shit works in prison. Like for some reason, that just really works as like background noise for me when I'm doing other things.
Man, I watched this this YouTube video. It was called like how they tricked us into being addicted to content. And it really, really both upset me at how clearly helplessly addicted I, as well as everybody, am/is to content. And it also made me just feel so grateful that I'm a content creator. Everybody's just, it's this dopamine stuff. They're like, what did it say in this video? It says like, if you set something up where like, you push a lever or something, it gives you $5. Like everyone's gonna push the lever, but then all of a sudden you switch the lever to give you like $100. Then everyone's gonna push the lever. But now if you go back to $5, people are just straight bummed. They cannot go back to $5. And so they applied that philosophy to, like, you could go on a walk. People used to be able to go on a walk, but now like, you start going on a walk while listening to a podcast. Now you can't go on a walk anymore. You got to be listening to a podcast.
Right.
And like the way that they just played it out, they just described this like addiction, this like we're addicted to constantly having that dopamine hit of something that we find interesting.
Yeah.
And it just like completely overrules our life. And ever since I watched that video, I realized, oh my God, like,
yeah, you got to be careful. Because you can mindlessly allow that constant search for content to like take over your existence. Like yesterday, I went out for a walk at night doing like an hour of cardio. And at first, as soon as I walk out the house, just immediately it clicks into my head like, oh, of course I got to put a podcast on. Put on some podcast about the fucking Republican debate that happened the other day. No real reason for me to need to listen to a 45-minute podcast about this, but I'm listening to it for the first 15 minutes, and then I get a call or something. So I pick up the call, talk to somebody for 5 minutes, and then when I get off the phone, the podcast does not automatically restart. So I'm just doing cardio for like 10 minutes, not listening to anything, just thinking. And then it hits me like, oh, like you let the podcast stop for the last 10 minutes. This is way better. Like I actually needed some time to really be able to think about what the fuck is going on in my life. But I just, without even thinking about it, as soon as I walked out that door, I put that podcast on in some ways so that I wouldn't have space to think about my life.
Right. For sure. It's, dude, it's nuts, man. It's absolutely nuts the way that it works, man.
And sometimes you really like you see it through other people too, where you start to realize that your content is filling a hole in people's lives where maybe they don't have a lot going on, but they're kind of like living vicariously through you. They're having opinions about you and your relationship and your friends, and they're like deep into it. Like they really are paying attention to the way that you talk to this person versus the way that you talk to this person. And, oh, you must not respect this person, but you do respect this person.
There's
and like, there's people where sometimes you just wonder like what else could be done with all this brain power, or what was the version of this in the 80s and the 90s?
Right. Well, it used to be TV. People.
Yeah.
Like,
which is even kind of sadder, right?
Yeah.
Because at least I can customize my media diet.
Right.
You know?
And podcasting made it so that people really get to know like the you. You know, you can't like for you like what, an hour every single day at least, you know, like you can't like put up some kind of a fake like facade of who you are, some you know, like it comes to a certain point where when there's that much raw, unedited, unfiltered, just you having conversations, people are going to find out what you're really like.
So here's a question. Do you ever find yourself do you ever find yourself kind of having a hard time thinking of shit to talk about, or where maybe you are scheduled to podcast every single week and it can become kind of difficult to like think of stuff that you really care about having a conversation about? When you first start, it just pours out of you, right? It's like so easy because you haven't done this. And then as time goes by, sometimes it starts to feel like, well, fuck, like I don't really have anything that comes to mind that I'm excited to talk about right now.
It depends on who I'm talking to. There's some guests where like I'm getting ready to go into it and I'm like, man, I better really research. Like I better, you know, come up with a game plan, like how I'm going to map it out, like have stuff prepared. And then there's other cases where I'm like, I just know that it's just going to flow.
Right. Because that's like the comedian thing, is to like hang out backstage and just talk.
A little bit, yeah.
And when you're in that environment, it's hard to imagine running out of shit to talk about.
Right.
And then sometimes on the podcast, it feels a little different, but also it depends on like what you expect of yourself as a podcaster. Because like the other day I listened to Joe Rogan interview Post Malone for 4.5 hours, and they were talking about whatever.
And it was good.
It was pretty good, but it wasn't like, there was no moment of like with me when I think about, oh, if I sat down with Post Malone, I think I would want to ask him this, and this, and like how he felt when this rapper said this thing, or like this awkward thing that happened this one time. Like I would go crazy trying to just like put together stuff to talk about. Whereas with him and Joe, it was kind of like, hey, let's just talk about archery for 45 minutes. It's like you could talk about archery with anyone, but you're in here with like one of the most famous pop stars in the world. You're the biggest podcaster in the world. And they clearly were just talking about whatever the fuck came to mind, you know?
Dude, I had William Shatner on my podcast. The dude is 92 years old. Jesus. Right? And like, we just sat down and had this, by the way, it was one of my like most top performing podcasts in recent times, or maybe not. It did reasonably well.
Right.
and I was like excited about it because my dad's like 80. And we talked about my dad because here I'm like, dude, William, man, like my dad turned 80 and like you being 92 and just so on it, so sharp. And so they're just like, makes me so happy because I think about my dad all the time, you know? And like, so I sent it to my dad. My dad's like, man, I'm disappointed in this.
Really?
He's like, you could have asked him about Star Trek. You could have, what was it like to do this, like this prolific career, and you're sitting here just like talking about whatever comes up. It's like, in fact, my dad said, it felt a lot more like we were watching you like have a conversation with him over dinner than like you taking the opportunity to really ask him this.
Wow,
and I'm
you
like,
got like a hardcore critique right there.
Yeah.
It's basically the same exact critique that I'm kind of putting forth for Joe Rogan right there.
But people loved it, and like, you know, as I feel like if I did like get into like a structured, like, okay, now this question and Captain Kirk, and it's like that he would have kind of like lost interest in, you know, maybe he wouldn't have enjoyed it so much.
But your dad's like a real Star Trek fan?
Not a real Star Trek fan. My dad's just like a logic machine. He's just like almost devoid of emotion, like just hardcore businessman. Like, you know, His mind is a calculator.
I need everybody to check out NoJumper.com. We officially started a blog. It has in-depth articles about current events, music, etc., plus all of our content in terms of podcasts, interviews, etc. And you can get some exclusive new merch if you check out NoJumper.com. So make sure you tap in.